Hey guys, today we're in the book of 1 Kings chapter 18. Now remember, King Ahab is the king of the north, the 10 tribes of the north of Israel. And he is bad. It says that he is the worst king that has been. Plus he has married a foreign princess, Jezebel of Sidonia, who is brought in this complete realm of worshiping Baal and all these false gods. And Elijah is a prophet of God, and he has been hiding and waiting for this moment, right? And so we pick up with 18. We see, after many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the third year, go show yourself. Remember, Elijah hid in a brook where he was drinking out of the creek and being fed by birds. Then he goes to stay with a widow. And now, after over 3 years, God has told him it's time to come out of hiding. It's time to show yourself. So he goes and he starts making his way to King Ahab. But before he gets to Ahab, we learn a little story about a guy named Obadiah. This is not the guy that wrote the minor prophet, Obadiah, okay? This is not him. It's a different guy. But here is a prophet who is in the palace of Ahab, but yet he still loves and respects the Lord. So you would have to believe that he is kind of two-faced, if best, because there's no way Ahab would let somebody like this stay in his presence. But we don't really know. It's a speculation. But we find out that Obadiah loves the Lord so much that Jezebel, the Queen Jezebel, was going to kill all the prophets of the Lord. And Obadiah takes 100 of the prophets and he hides them in caves. And so 50 in one cave, 50 in the other. And we find out as we read that Ahab and Jezebel would send him and lots of people out to countries and towns and say, have you seen Elijah? Have you seen Elijah? They've been looking for any prophets of the Lord, specifically Elijah, but any prophet of the Lord, so that they would kill them. So we get this idea that they hunted down every prophet of the Lord and killed them, except for these 100 that are in hiding, and only Obadiah knows where they are at. And so they're going and they split up. They're looking for water because remember, it's been a drought for 3 years in the northern part of Israel. And so many people have died. Animals are dying. And so the king says, hey, let's split up. You go this way. I go this way. Let's find water. Do not leave any stone unturned. And as they split up, Obadiah is walking and he sees a man who is Elijah. And we see in verse 9, he says, Elijah sees him and says, hey, go tell King Ahab I'm here to see him. And Obadiah answers, how have I sinned that you would give your servant into the hand of Ahab? They've looked for Elijah for over 3 years now. And Obadiah knows if he goes back to King Ahab and says, I have found Elijah, but Elijah doesn't show up, he knows that Ahab will kill him, right? Because he let him slip through his hands. And so Obadiah says, I understand. I don't think this is a good idea because if you don't show up, he's going to kill me. And Elijah swears to him, I will surely show myself to him today. That's verse 15. He says, absolutely, I will show up to King Ahab. And so when Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, is it you troubler of Israel? So this is kind of a comic relief line, right? Ahab is the worst king that ever has been in Israel's history up until this point. But yet he's blaming Elijah for the drought. He's blaming him for the problem, not himself, right? So it's kind of a little funny thing. But Elijah says, hey, it's not me, it's you. You've abandoned the commandments. You followed the Baals. And so Elijah says, here's what we want you to do. I want you to gather all of Israel. Now, it's not all, millions and millions of people on Mount Carmel. It's not that big of a mountain, but it would have been the elders, right? So get all the elders, have some witnesses. So when you see what God's going to do, all of Israel will know that he is God. So he says, get all of Israel, get the elders up on the mountain, and get your 450 prophets of Baal and your 400 prophets of Asherah, which is another false god. Notice that last line, it says, who eats at Jezebel's table? This is what we would call today, who is government sponsored. The government is paying the salary and feeding and taking care of these 850 false prophets. So this tells you how far the northern tribe has walked away from God, right? They're not worshiping God. They're not going south to the temple, but now they have on their government payroll 850 false prophets. Sounds like they need Doge to clean that up, right? Verse 20, Ahab sent all the people and he gathered the prophets. Ahab did exactly what Elijah said. Now, we don't know why. This seems really weird to me. Maybe God's hand was on it. Maybe he thought that this was going to be proof, final proof that God was gone. I don't know what he was thinking, but Ahab does. He does exactly as Elijah says. And Elijah came near to all the people and said, how long will you go limping between your two different opinions? When all of Israel gets to Mount Carmel, he says, hey, how long are you going to go back and forth? How long are you going to serve Yahweh? How long are you going to serve Baal? How long are you going to go back and forth, right? And notice it says, Israel said the people did not answer a word. There was no word. There was no repentance. There was nothing. They said nothing to him. And Elijah said to the people, even I only am left a prophet of the Lord. Now he knows he's not the only one because Obadiah told him that there's 100 other prophets, but he said, even if I'm the only one, this is what's going to happen. And so he says, hey, bring 2 bulls and we're going to have a showdown. We see in verse 24, it says, the God who answers by fire is God. And so he tells the prophets of Baal to set up an altar, to cut up the bull, to put the sticks down, and to get everything ready. And when everything is ready, then they will ultimately pray, and they will, if Baal will send down fire, their God is God. Now, all this is happening from morning until about noon, but nothing is happening, right? It says that they're cutting themselves, which means they were fully devoted. They were willing to bleed everywhere. They were crying out. They were praying for a long time, but there was no voice. And then Elijah begins to mock them and says, maybe your God's in the bathroom. Maybe he's on vacation. Maybe he's not paying attention. Come on, do more, do more, do more. And they begin to dance around and jump around and be energetic, but still nothing happened. Then about noontime, Elijah comes in and he starts to rebuild the altar that has been torn down, right? This altar that's been torn down already by King Ahab. He starts to rebuild it with 12 stones, one for each of the tribes. He does the same. He cuts the bull, gets it ready, but instead he digs a trench around the altar. And then he commands them to fill 4 jars full of water. And when we think jar, you don't think this big, you think this big, right? It's 20, 30 gallons each jar. And so he says, dump it on there. Do it twice. Do it 3 times. So probably hundreds of gallons of water have been dumped on everything. So all the wood is wet. All the meat is wet. Everything is wet. Even the trench is full of water. That's how much water it was. And then Elijah simply prays. And he said, let it be known that this day that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant. And at his word, the Lord caught it on fire. The fire of the Lord consumed, and all of the people fell on their faces and said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. They were instantly persuaded by the power it happened. They seen all the prophets of Baal, all the prophets of Asherah who couldn't do anything. And then Elijah goes above and beyond that. He made the impossible possible, and all this happened, proving that God was real. And so Elijah took the false prophets down to the brook of Keshron, which is the garbage dump, and he had them slaughtered. He killed them all, just as Jezebel killed all of Yahweh's prophets. And Elijah said to Ahab, go up and eat and drink, for there is a sound of rushing rain. He said, hey, you need to go because rain is coming, right? Now that the prophets of Baal are dead, now it can rain again. The drought will be over. So he goes up on this. While Elijah goes up on Mount Carmel again, he prays, and at the seventh time, he looks and he finally sees a little cloud rising out in the sea, and all of a sudden it begins to rain and rain and rain, and eventually King Ahab is heading back towards Samaria, where Jezreel is, right? He's heading back there. And we get this little interesting line, the last verse. And the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he gathered up his garment and ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezebel. So what happens is somehow supernaturally God came and told Elijah he needed to go, but he supernaturally made him run a race, right? He ran 14 miles to the entrance of Jezreel to beat King Ahab. So we'll find out tomorrow why that was happening, but this is a supernatural event that he comes and he beats King Ahab on his horses and on his chariots. And so, but we'll see tomorrow in chapter 19 why it was important that Elijah would get to Jezebel before King Ahab. Hope that makes a little bit more sense, and we'll see you tomorrow in chapter 19. God bless.